The American Revolution by Austin Garrett. The standard I'm using is the U.S. History Curriculum South Carolina State Standard 1.2. It says, analyze the early development of representative government and political rights in the American colonies, including the influence of British political system and the rule of law as written in the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights, and the conflict between the colonial legislators and the British Parliament over the right to tax resulted in the American Revolutionary War. So basically, we'll stem off of that standard and talk about the events leading up to the American Revolutionary War. So, in the beginning, you had 13 colonies. They were under the government of the British legislator. And so, they were separated by the Big Lake Ocean, which caused a lot of struggle. And that struggle was known as salutary neglect. Now, salutary neglect is basically just the result of it being too difficult to keep control of the colonists. So the British let the colonists kind of just do their own thing. And then they would collect their taxes, take their censuses, and do all that. But it was just really hard because you didn't have any sort of way to communicate. You had no email, planes, cell phones, anything like that. You couldn't even send a carrier pigeon over. You had to do everything by ship. So the first thing that happened, we had the French and Indian War. So the French and Indian War was between the British over land in North America. The war lasted for 70 years and was really, really costly. This cost put Britain in a lot of debt, causing King George to tax the colonists a whole lot. One of those taxes was the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act was a tax imposed on all sugar in the colonies. Sugar was used for a lot of different things, and so this made colonies real bad. They love their sugar, but now some of them couldn't afford it because it was being taxed so much. Next came the Currency Act, which was a act placed on the colonies to get rid of all their different bills that they used as legal tender. They wanted to keep the colonies on one legal tender to use that was the same as the British. This was just another tool that the British used to gain more control of their colonies. So next you have the Quartering Act. So the British had all their troops in the colonies right now since of the French and Indian War, and so they needed a place to put their soldiers, and so all the inns were full, everything like that. So they turned to the colonists and said, "Hey, if you guys could just put them in your house and feed them, that'd be great." This made the colonists really mad because they didn't want to feed them in their mouth or keep up with them or anything like that. Next came the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was placed on all legal documents like letters, marriage licenses, and even things like playing cards. And so when you bought all these paper goods, or if you sent a letter or anything like that, you would get taxed. It would cost you. And so taxes started to rise, and people were getting really angry because they couldn't even send a simple letter to grandma. And so this created a thing called the Stamp Act Congress, which tried to repeal the taxes already placed on the colonists. From there, we get to the Townshend Acts, which is now a new series of taxes that were imposed on the colonists. So these taxes were placed to raise revenue in the colonies and provide them to the governors and judges to keep them loyal to the British government. Now, people didn't like these whole taxes that were imposed on them, and so Britain had to send more troops, which led to our next event, the Boston Massacre. Now, the Boston Massacre was all these British troops were in Boston, and people did not like them. They were bad-mouthing them. They were throwing objects, doing all this stuff. There's a group of 5 soldiers standing there. They were getting just wailed on by people, and people were just letting them have it. And finally, the British troops opened up and fired on the crowd, and 5 people were shot, and 3 people died on the spot, but 2 people died later. And so patriots used this to really boost the emotion and really get people riled up against the British. So next came the Tea Act. So the British, they decided to place more taxes on the colonists, and so they placed a tax on the most common drink in the colonies, which was tea. Outraged colonists formed this group called the Sons and Daughters of Liberty, and they went and dressed up one night and had this thing called the Boston Tea Party. They dressed up as Indians and went out into the harbor and dumped all the tea into the harbor. And so they kind of stick it to the British government and tell them they don't even want their tea because it's being taxed so much. It was better just to be thrown into the harbor than for them to drink it. And so the British were pretty mad at them, so they decided to punish people, and they imposed the Intolerable Acts. Now, the Intolerable Acts were more taxes and laws. It was a total of 5 that were placed on the people in the colonies for their actions. And so the first one we had was the Boston Port Act, followed by the Massachusetts Government Act, then the Administration of Justice Act, then the Quartering Act of 1774, which was similar to the first Quartering Act, and then eventually we had the Quebec Act. So basically, these people did not like these acts, did not like these taxes, didn't like anything. So they kind of decided to get together their own committee to go to Parliament, to the British government, and say, "Hey, we don't want these anymore." And that government was called the First Continental Congress. So 12 out of 13 colonies joined together to boycott British trade and to petition the king. Now you may be asking, what happened to the 13th colony? Well, that was Georgia. Georgia kind of had some problems with Native Americans, and were hoping that the British, they stayed allied to them, would take care of it for them. So they kind of had to lose their aid with the British, or and gain their freedom, or did they, want to be oppressed by the British and still have the protection? It's kind of one of those type of things. And so finally, this unified the colonies all together before the war starts. And eventually, at Lexington and Concord, we have our first shots fired. As the tensions rose, it was kind of this big, giant powder keg, and the first shot kind of lit it all off into the big Revolutionary War. So if we take a review, we started off that you had colonies and the British. And the British kind of let the colonies do what they want. That was called what? Salutatory neglect. And after that, they had the French and Indian War, which caused Britain to get into a lot of debt. And Britain had so much debt that they needed money to repay it, so they decided to go to the colonists. So after these years of not paying attention to the colonists, they said, "Hey, we're going to take your money." And so they imposed the Sugar Act. And then after that, they imposed the Currency Act. And after that, they put troops in the houses. That caused the Quartering Act. And after that, they had the Stamp Act. And after that, they had all the Townshend Acts. And people were really, really angry, so they sent in more troops, which then caused the Boston Massacre. And so people were fired up about that. And then Britain still needed more money, so they taxed the tea. And then people got angry about that and dumped all the tea into the harbor. And then the British tried to show who was boss. And so they imposed more taxes on the British, on the colonists. And then the colonists tried to petition against the king. And finally, it all built up and a war broke out. And that's kind of how everything led up into the American Revolutionary War. It was a very exciting time. A lot of things happened. We see that the British, from their debt from the French and Indian War, and them trying to regain the money, is what really got them tied up into this war.